So, what does it actually look like when a community that's been broken and scattered is promised a future of, well, complete restoration? Today, we're diving into an ancient prophecy that answers that very question with this incredible picture of hope and renewal. We're breaking down Zechariah chapter 8.
Here's how we're going to walk through this powerful chapter. First, we'll look at God's really passionate promise. Then, we'll explore this dramatic shift from being a curse to becoming a blessing. After that, we'll dig into the conditions for this new reality. And finally, we'll see this stunning vision of its impact on the whole world.
All right, let's jump right into our first section. The chapter kicks off with a super intense declaration from God in verse 2, and it really defines his relationship with his people and their city, Jerusalem, which is also called Zion.
Now, when we hear that word jealousy, our minds usually jump to something negative, right? Something possessive or insecure. But in this context, it means something totally different.
Yeah, so this is not petty human envy. It's this divine protective passion, a fierce commitment to his people and the promises he made to them. Now, that second part of the verse, the great fury, well, that's where things get really fascinating because it seems to point to two very different moments in history.
And this is just a wild insight. God's fury here isn't aimed at his people, but at the world powers holding them back. And what a parallel. You have this ancient world event, Persia's lightning-fast takeover of Babylon, and this modern-day cataclysm of World War II. In both cases, a world-shaking fury comes right before a major restoration for the Jewish people.
And this promised restoration, which we see in verse 3, it goes way beyond just rebuilding some walls. We're talking about a complete moral and spiritual renewal. Jerusalem is going to be called a city of truth, and the Temple Mount, the holy mountain. And you know what? This vision pops up in other places too. And there it is. You see this consistent vision. Both Isaiah and Zechariah see a future where Jerusalem becomes the spiritual center of the world, a place where all nations actually flow to learn God's ways. Is a huge idea. Then in verses 4 and 5, the prophecy kind of zooms in. It shifts from this huge global vision right down to the streets of the city. And it paints this beautiful picture of what daily life is going to look like in this city of truth. You know, this image isn't just sweet, it's a massive indicator of the city's health. In the ancient world, if you saw old people and kids just hanging out in the open, it was the ultimate sign of peace and security. It meant there was no threat of war or famine, the society was stable, it was thriving, it was safe. And to wrap up this first part, verses 7 and 8 give us this promise of a worldwide regathering. God says he's going to bring his people back from all over the globe, east and west, and fully restore that covenant relationship, one that's defined by truth and righteousness. Okay, that brings us to our second section, and the prophecy takes a really interesting turn here. It pivots from this beautiful future vision to a very direct, right now, command for the people who had just come back from exile. So in verse 9, God speaks right to the generation that's trying to rebuild the temple. You have to imagine this was exhausting, discouraging work. So he tells them, let your hands be strong, finish the job. And then he reminds them just how bad things were before they started this work. I mean, look at this contrast. It could not be more stark. In verse 10, he reminds them of the recent past. Economic collapse, social chaos, everyone against their neighbor. That was before they committed to rebuilding. But now, as they obey, verse 12 promises the complete opposite: prosperous farms, fruitful vines, and even the heavens cooperating. In verse 13, this is the absolute turning point. Their exile had made them a symbol of failure among the nations, a curse. And now, God promises this total identity swap. You will become a blessing. And get this, he says it again for emphasis. Let your hands be strong. Their action is tied directly to this amazing reversal. And this whole becoming a blessing thing, it's not a new idea. This is hitting a note that goes way, way back. It's a reaffirmation of one of the foundational promises in the entire Bible, the covenant God made with Abraham, that through him and his family, the whole world would be blessed. Okay, so these promises of prosperity and blessing sound incredible, right? But they aren't unconditional. Verses 16 and 17 lay out the ethical foundation, the absolute non-negotiables for this new community. So here they are, the 4 pillars of a just society. Speak truth to each other, make fair and peaceful judgments in your courts. Don't sit around plotting evil against your neighbor, and hate lying under oath. These aren't just, nice suggestions. They are the absolute bedrock requirements for a community that God is going to bless.
And that brings us to our final section, the powerful climax of the entire chapter. So, the big question is, what happens when a community actually lives this way? The last few verses paint a picture of the incredible global impact. Yeah, so what is the result of all this? The prophet gives an answer that is just astounding. It shows that when you have faithfulness on the inside, it creates this incredible attraction on the outside that can transform the world.
The very first transformation is internal. In verse 19, God talks about these national fast days. These were solemn, sad days that commemorated the tragic destruction of Jerusalem. They were national scars. But now, God declares these memorials of sorrow are going to be transformed into times of joy and gladness and cheerful feasts.
This is basically a command to stop defining themselves by their worst moments. God is saying it's time to move on, stop living in a posture of mourning, and start embracing a future of joy and hope.
And what happens when a community is filled with that kind of joy? It becomes a spiritual magnet. Just like verse 22 says, many people and strong nations shall come to seek the Lord in Jerusalem. They're not coming for trade or for war. They're coming because they're looking for God.
This whole global pilgrimage idea gets captured in the chapter's final iconic image, and it's all symbolized by a single number, 10. And here it is, the final vision in verse 23. The number 10, which often symbolizes completeness, represents people from all the nations of the world. And they'll grab hold of a single Jewish person and say, "We'll go with you, because we've heard that God is with you." And that's really the ultimate takeaway of Zechariah 8. The greatest proof of restoration isn't wealth or power. It's when a community lives with such truth and joy that the rest of the world can't help but see God right there in their midst.